Hello there, I'm Leo Waldock and this is Kit Guru, and this little piece of equipment here is the MSI wind box. Specifically, it's a DC111 wind box because it's actually the third version of wind box, although it's the first one I personally have seen. And wind box, it's a curious old name, isn't it? There we go. Wind box, W-I-N-D. I've had it confirmed it is wind as in blows like the wind, not wind as in winds me up. The first version of wind box, going back to my notes, was the DC100, which used an AMD E350 Brazos chip. The second was a DC110, which was switched to an Intel Celeron 847. That runs at all of 1.1 gigahertz. This here is the 111, which runs on a Celeron 1037U. As we know, U is ultra low voltage. It's Ivy Bridge architecture, 1.8 gigahertz dual core. So actually the clock speed has moved from really low to getting there kind of territory. All you get, the box consists of this, plus this little stand that clips on. There are no peripherals in the package, so forget about a screen, mouse, keyboard, anything like that. However, this is a fully featured, fully loaded computer. It comes loaded with Windows 8.1. They also make a point, actually, Windows 8.1 plus Bing. It's a browser, isn't it, or a search engine? Anyway, Windows 8.1 it is. You can buy this at list price for £199 including VAT, or you can get it if you search around for about £30 less, 169 or so is the lowest I've seen it online. However, you can also buy it as a bare bones without memory, hard drive or operating system for £91, which does seem remarkably cheap. Now let's see if I can just remove this stand. There we go. That's the thumb screw that retains the stand. Go to the back. There are two screws. That screw is uncovered. This screw is under the warranty sticker, so clearly you're not supposed to go inside. However, there is, in fairness, very little purpose in going inside because there's nothing you can upgrade. Actually, before I dive inside, let's take a quick look at the I/O panel. VGA, why, you ask yourself? Who on earth runs an analog monitor these days, unless you have some sort of crunchy old projector possibly. HDMI, a pair of USB 3, Ethernet, headphone jack, SPDIF out, power jack for the power brick. On the front panel we've got 4 USB 2 and a pair of headset jacks, so there is actually a microphone socket. Well, there isn't on the back, there is on the front. Right, now I need to pull off this back panel like so, which reveals almost nothing, but you can then see there's some plastic locking tabs, and I need to take off this panel here. Let's hope we can do that without snapping anything. Man fails to There we go. Goodness me. And inside you've got very little to see. There's a hard drive, which in this model is a 500 gig Hitachi. It's 5400 RPM. You've got a single module of DDR3 memory that is 4 gigabytes, and there under the little heatsink is the processor. So it's not strictly speaking system on chip. It does use sort of traditional architecture of processor plus chipset, but basically there's some silicon under that heatsink and a tiddly little fan. I have to say that when this system is running, that fan runs almost continuously. I mean, it's quite quiet, it spins up when it's under load. However, because the system is very low powered, it has very little grunt, the system is under load most of the time. Therefore, that fan actually gets a touch intrusive. Now, you can, in theory, lay the system down flat. I don't think there are any feet on there aren't. You can theoretically lay it flat so it just sits on your desktop. However, it's far better to have it propped up on this, and then you do get a kind of stormtrooper-esque look to the thing. There we go. The system is ventilated on both sides, and it does require airflow. So that tiny heatsink, that tiny fan, they work hard, and as you can see, it's only 35mm thick, 35mm thin if you prefer. So it's a bit of a shame, really. I'd have preferred it to be slightly bigger and have slightly better cooling because the fan got a touch annoying. Anyway, that's getting into the detail of it. The point here is it's a highly integrated, minimalist computer, Windows 8.1, as I say, bare bones, less than £100. all in, including the operating system, 169 if you look around, which is very, very cheap indeed. So the obvious question is, what can you do with this? Is it worth having, or is it a bit of a joke? Let's take a look. Before we get into the depths of the Wind box, it's worth pointing out that there is on the top of the little chassis a 3-in-1 card reader. I mentioned the I/O panel front and rear, there is also a card reader there. Now, this is in no way, shape or form a gaming computer, that's absolutely crystal clear. So why, you may wonder, am I running 3D Mark CloudGate? That's quite a weak graphics test. It's used for low-end laptops and such like. And in a sense, it's a completely unfair test. The surprising thing is that this little beast is actually managing to pull along around the 10 frames per second mark, which is hopeless for gaming, but the point is it can actually do it. There is a picture on the screen, and it's a bit jerky, but it works. Part of the reason I'm running it is because I've got this little gizmo called an Aureolus, which I'm going to do a separate thing on KitGuru about this, which actually gives you a readout of what the processor and the memory are doing. Now, while it's loading up the next section, the CPU pegged out around the 100% mark, and it's now up high. The memory is around about half, so it's using about 2 gig of the 4 gig of RAM. Bear in mind it's also running Windows 8.1. At certain tests, however, when the processor is not being stressed, it drops down quite low. So the processor at times is being flogged mercilessly, other times dropped back to minimal usage. And there we are, just below 100% there. Now, that's no great surprise when you're talking about a dual-core processor that's running at 1.8 GHz. The thing is that, obviously, 3D Mark stresses the graphics, obviously. And the graphics in this particular system are Intel HD Graphics GT1. Now, they change the numbering system of their graphics all the time. We're used to numbers such as 4200, 4600, 5000, now 6000 in the new chips being launched at CES. There are other ways of referring to the graphics, however, GT1, GT2, GT3. No matter what you call it, the graphics in this are the weakest in Intel's portfolio. And that's not saying much because Intel's portfolio of graphics is variable in the extreme. So GT1 graphics, not good. However, as you saw, it can actually run 3D Mark. And you'll see on KitGuru, I've actually run, in addition to CloudGate, I've also run Firestrike and Firestrike Extreme. The scores are, as you'd expect, pathetic. But that's fine, that's not what this is intended to do. The funny thing is, the aspect of the graphics that is most annoying to me is not the power or lack of, is actually the HDMI output. When you connect to a PC display, as most of you will know, you very often have to scale the display. You have this overscanning, underscanning thing. The picture basically is bigger than the screen, you have to pull it back to get it the correct size. Different graphics chips and also drivers have varying degrees of success. NVIDIA and AMD have basically got this nailed now. Intel still struggles. So that for me is the biggest problem actually, is that the picture as displayed, although it's perfectly competent and worked, is not pin sharp. You have to put it back to something like 73% scaling, and then it's like it's the correct size, it just doesn't look perfect. And that for me is a problem because I'm expecting it to look better. If on the other hand you plug it into a screen and it works, you might not care. If you're giving this as a cheapish gift to your old granny, she might not even be aware it's not pin sharp. However, were you to connect it to your television as a kind of extra computer in the house along with a wireless mouse and keyboard, as you can see I've got here wireless mouse and keyboard dongles, so were you to plug it to your TV using one of the HDMI inputs, it could well have a place. The thing is, it depends how you're going to use it. If you sit at home using your phone or your tablet to order stuff from Amazon, that's not great on a small display. You might fancy using a cheapish computer hooked up to your TV. On the other hand, if you've got a smart TV with the latest with all the built-in functions, or indeed even a games console, then you might not be interested. So it depends how you think you're using this. If you're going to sit there just typing out some coursework for a university or school, and you're not doing the multimedia stuff, other than watching the occasional movie clip, this works nicely, it really does. If you're doing the proverbial email web browsing, absolutely terrific. You want to start hammering Photoshop, forget about it. You want to start rendering videos, absolutely forget about it. So it very much depends on what you think you might use this for. And I truly expected to finish this review basically laughing at this, because it's obviously physically it's a toy, you can't upgrade it, the spec is fairly dire, but it does do a certain job. The job it does, however, very much depends on the person buying it, whether you're buying it for yourself, whether you're buying it for a relative. Let's face it, the maintenance you're going to have to do on this is minimal, because you're not going to be doing anything inside the box whatsoever. It's purely going to come down to Windows and software. That's your lot. So that's quite tempting. Anyway, I'm not sure I'd bother buying this as a bare bones, unless you've got some cunning plan to run Linux or some wacky install like that, in which case, fair enough, have fun. If you're thinking about putting an SSD in it instead of a hard drive, then you're whacking up the expense unless you happen to have an old SSD lying around. It's possible. But in terms of operating system, this is clearly intended to be a Windows box. Maybe that's where the name comes from, actually, Windbox. I hadn't thought about that. So, yeah, alright, I'm going to go with that, actually. It's the MSI Windbox because it's meant to run Windows. Yeah, obvious, really, duh. If you, on the other hand, you fancy cobbling together Linux or something for it, why not? But I'm inclined to take it as it comes. It's £169 as a fully featured Windows 8.1 computer. You need your peripherals, but blimey, it does far better than I expected. So this is Leo Waldock with a pleasingly warm word for the MSI Windbox DC111.